Okay. I'm Gary Page. I'm from Homefront Strong. I am a volunteer and board member, and we are going to be interviewing for David Helman's personal and military story. Dave, would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Dave Helman, and I was born in West Virginia, and I enlisted in the Air Force in 1961, and remained there for quite a while.
Would you give us a little bit of story about yourself before you went in the Air Force?
I was always interested in airplanes, the identification and everything, and I was near, it wasn't a base, but an airplane hangar, and I would be able to watch airplanes fly. And I was always, after high school, or during high school, I was in the Civil Air Patrol, and I was the junior communications officer, and we'd have to check in once a week. Well, after I graduated, I took a test to go in the Air Force, and since I had communication skills before that, I tested high in communications, and I used to work on radios and build kits. I put up a long wire antenna because I was listening to far distance radio, mostly country music stations, and I was able to pull those in readily. So when I went in and did the test, I scored high on doing the testing of equipment.
Wasn't it radios also? Yes.
Yes, I also did radio.
Okay, before you went in the service, were there any members in your family that were veterans?
Well, during my parents' time, my uncle was in the Air Force, and he would come to stay with us for a little while, and I learned more about that. He was stationed over in the UK, and he came back saying all the terms like bloody this and bloody that.
Okay, let's go back to the Civil War. You said you had some relatives back then?
In the Civil War, I had a distant relative that was in the Civil War, and my son is also interested in the Civil War, so we found in our history his name, which happened to be the same name as my son, Daniel Helman. So we looked him up and found out a lot of information about him, which was very helpful for us.
How big was your family?
Well, my family, my mother and father were from southern Pennsylvania originally, then they moved over the border into Maryland. He worked for the Western Maryland Railroad, and he was transferred to Elkins, West Virginia, where 5 of the 6 kids were born. Then he got transferred back to Western Maryland, where I finished growing up, more or less.
So you enlisted. Tell me about what happened after you enlisted.
Well, after I enlisted, of course, I went to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas for basic training. And that was in July. The red flag was up most of the time because it was so hot, and we had to stay in the barracks, which in some cases wasn't that much better. When we were out marching, we would be passing by the canteen with all the sodas and the candy bars and everything, and of course we couldn't partake in that, so that was not good for us at the time. Well, I got homesick a little bit, but didn't last that long. I had some memories of back home, but I made it through.
Cool. Let's see. When did you graduate from basic training? Wasn't it July
Yeah, July
1961, maybe?
1961.
Okay. And you were assigned to training at Keesler?
Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. When we got off the bus and landed there, we had an orientation, and they said, whatever you do, don't go in town with a black friend. And that was the case in 61, 62. So we had to go in with our other friends, and we of course went to the bar, had a couple of drinks, and that was the first time I ever had an alcoholic drink.
How did that go?
Well, when I went home, I went back to the barracks, and I laid down that night. I've never had the sensation of my bed spinning, but I soon got over that.
Yeah, you had a 30-day leave, didn't you, at some point?
Yeah, I was in the airborne communications repair there, and I did have a leave at one point, 30 days, and went back home to Hagerstown, Maryland.
You enlisted because you were interested in aircraft. Was there any instructor that stood out in your mind during your time?
Well, one of the instructors in my training class was a bit unusual. I looked up from my table, and he went over to a table out front, and there was a rubber mat laying there. For some reason, he pulled a string off of that and put it in his mouth and started chewing on it. I thought that was quite unusual.
Did he tell you why he did that?
No, never asked him. It was just kind of curious.
So you was working on a piece of equipment and you had a pencil you stuck somewhere?
Yeah, it was a live piece of equipment, and we were supposed to be testing it. And I had this mechanical pencil, metal pencil, and I stuck it in there, and I hit 300 volts, and my pencil went flying across the room.
Really?
I don't know if anybody saw it or not, but...
Wow. What did you do after graduating from tech school? That would be the military tech school, Air Force.
Yeah, Uncle Sam invited me to Westover Air Force Base after that 30-day leave, and my dad bought a car for me. It was a 56 Chevrolet, and we were on our way up. We got sidetracked in New York City, but we finally made it up to Springfield, Massachusetts, and we weren't sure the hotel where we were going to, so we stopped and asked a person where this hotel was. And he started talking to us, and at first I couldn't hardly understand him because he had more of a Boston accent, but we did finally find the hotel and stayed there overnight, and then went over to the base. He dropped me off. Then I had the car there, and I think he took a bus home.
What was your basic assignment at Westover?
Well, it was radio repair, and I wasn't in long enough to do any bench repairs on the radios or other equipment. So I was assigned to go out to the aircraft, the KC-135s and the 97s, and test the equipment that the pilots or co-pilots said that wasn't working correctly. So if it was a radio communication, I would sometimes radio over to Lodge's Field in the Azores, and they would tell me if the signal was strong or not, or maybe no signal. Also, we tested the inboard communications equipment between all the crew members. And sometimes I'd have to go back into the refueling pod to check out some of that equipment. And just to go back a little bit, the black box, if it needed repair, I would bring it in to the shop.
How long were you at Westover?
Well, I was there until I mustered out in 1965.
What did they have for aircraft then?
Well, they had the KC-97 and KC-135 refueling aircraft. They also had the B-47s, bombers, some B-52s because it was a SAC base, Strategic Air Command base, and we would have to go out and check those out. There was an incident where there was a B-47 getting ready to taxi out onto the runway, and the wings were drooping, and it had to have two wing walkers there to kind of make sure when the plane turned that they didn't dip and hit the ground.
Wow, that must have been an interesting job. What happened after that? After you mustered out?
Well, being in communications at Westover, I was heavy into CB radio. That's before I mustered out. And I put up an antenna on the roof of the barracks, and I beefed up the receiver and transmitter, and I was able to talk with non-skip down to Long Island. And I was also communicating with a young man right outside of the base that was in high school named Charlie Topa.
You communicated back and forth?
Yeah, we communicated back and forth, and I was actually on my way to East Hampton with a girl that I was dating, and I had a flat tire, and I radioed up to Charlie, which was just up the road, and he said, well, my cousin is here, Jane, she has a car just like yours, so you could borrow her spare tire. So they brought it down, I put the spare on, I took my girlfriend home, but then after midnight chow, because I worked till like 3 to 11, I would radio her from my bunk and talk to her for maybe an hour or so. We became more than just friends. We started dating before I got out, and then we were married. Okay, I think I mentioned some of the aircraft that were there, and I had to contact Lodge's Field to test some of the equipment. And at that time, I didn't know that I was going to be stationed at Lodge's Field in the Azores. It's a Portuguese chain of islands. And I was happy to be there. Sometimes we would go into town for a couple of beers. We went into this one place, and they had the beer that was from one of the islands, and they also made cheese sandwiches there. So in order to get a cheese sandwich, it was in this case. They had to chase the flies off of it to get the cheese out to put it on the bread.
Nice.
And they also had dried and salted lima beans, so you could eat those. And of course, after that, you'd have to have more beers. So a lot of our friends visited there maybe every other week. But it's a little unique town. I guess I said near the bay, and oxen were driven down the cobblestone street. Many of us went into a shoe shop in town where they made shoes custom for you. They had a number of catalogs, and you picked out the shoes that you wanted. Thinking back, I should have had some cowboy boots made. Some guys did. But I had a little high-top leather shoe made. Before they make the shoe, they had you put your foot or both feet on a piece of paper, and they traced it, and that's how they knew the size and everything. I guess I had those for maybe 10 years before they wore out. So they were ready in probably a week or a week and a half, then you would go pick them up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so from there you went to Torrejon Air Base in Madrid?
Yep, Torrejon Air Base in Madrid. It was only temporary duty. And we used to go into town in Madrid. Of course, there were some bars in there that we would visit. I went into one. I found it strange that there were a line of young women up against the wall. And I went and sat down and ordered a drink. And a woman came over and sat next to me. Next thing I knew, she had her hand on my leg. And that was my first experience with a woman, and enough said on that subject.
All right, so you returned to Leisures Field with some R&R?
Yeah, we had R&R in London. That's rest and recuperation. And a friend of mine in the unit was in contact with a female pen pal there in London. So when we went down to London on the train, he got a hold of her, and we met with her, and she brought a girlfriend with her, and we talked for quite a while. And then we went to her parents' house, and her parents began talking, and I could hardly understand them because of the Cockney accent. But we got through that. One of the girls, because the Beatles were really popular at that point in time, she gave me a poster of the Beatles. And I brought that back home, and for some reason I lost it. It probably would have been worth some money these days.
Probably. Let's see, you went back to Westover to serve your 4-year term?
Yeah, I was supposed to be getting out in 1965 on time, but they wanted to extend some of us because of the Vietnam War. But I mustered out on time, and very interested in the CB radio at that time. And that's, like I mentioned before, that's how I met my first wife.
What was the name?
Jane Scott. We were married in 1966, and I joined her church and became a deacon. And I was a deacon off and on for the 40 years that I was at the church. Occasionally, the minister was going to be away. It was called the diaconate, so there were men and women on it. We kind of lined up there, and he said, I need somebody to be in the pulpit on this particular Sunday. And it kind of felt like I was back in the military, and seemed like everybody stepped back but me. So I guess I was the volunteer.
They roped you in on that one, did they?
Yeah.
You had a couple of children while you were married?
Yeah, we were there for about 30 years until Jane passed away at age 56 from breast cancer complications.
Sorry to hear that.
We had 2 children, a boy and a girl, Daniel and Sherry Lee, which name I made up. Had three grandchildren, 3 girls, Danielle, Caitlin, and Isabel. And then I had 2 great-grandkids, a boy and a girl. And now I just learned there's one on the way.
Oh, that's nice. So tell me about the WWVA. It sounds like a radio station.
Yeah, like I said before, I had a console radio that I was able to tune in a lot of distant stations with the long wire antenna. And I was listening to WWVA in Wheeling, West Virginia. My mom thought I was upstairs sleeping, but I was listening to Lee Moore, who called himself the coffee-drinking Nighthawk. He was on from midnight till dawn, playing records and playing his guitar and singing. Yeah, I was heavy into radio and country and bluegrass music, so I was doing a bluegrass festival in Dufresne Park in Granby in the mid-1980s. And I found out that Lee Moore was living over in Wynantskill, New York. So I contacted him, and he was able to do a set 2 years in a row at the festival. Yeah, I started collecting country music and bluegrass albums in the Air Force, and I continued that afterwards. I was interested in radio, like I mentioned, and I was reading the Advocate newspaper and found out that there was a radio show on WMUA at UMass, and I started listening to it, and one of the DJs said, well, we're always looking for somebody to be on the air up here. And they gave out the phone number. And I almost broke my leg getting to the phone to give them a call. I called them and they said, well, yeah, come up and we'll talk about it. So we talked about a possible position there. And they said, go home, put together a 1-hour show and bring it up in a couple of weeks, and we'll have somebody help you broadcast that 1-hour show. And that was the beginning of that. It was called Country Blues and Bluegrass, and it was on Sunday afternoons for about 4 or 5 hours, playing country, blues, bluegrass, Irish music, and Cajun music, and some related other music. And there was probably 5 or 6 people that were DJs there, and I was only on like once a month. And at that point, I started what I called Country Corner Productions, and that was going to be my umbrella from there on for anything I did with my music.
Was that before or after you had the band?
That was before I had the band.
Okay.
Somebody called me from WTCC at Springfield Technical Community College. Mm-hmm. They were doing a folk show there, and he said, how would you like to program some music here? I said, I would love to, because at WMUA it was only 1,000 watts, and at WTCC in Springfield it was 4,000 watts, would reach more people. It was more straight line up and down the river valley, going up into the hill towns east and west, not so much. But I started there on a Wednesday, and at that time I was working at Wrexham Graphics in South Hadley on rotating shifts. So this being on a Wednesday morning, I had to give up my day shift and have to work 2 night shifts, which I really didn't care for. But then a slot came open on Saturday from 1 to 3, and I took that. And to this date, I've been broadcasting in the Pioneer Valley for over 40 years. I don't plan stopping very soon.
Why don't we talk about the band just a little bit?
Well, the band that I'm in is called Old Country Road, but before that, we had a group called the Good Samaritan Singers, and there was 7 of us in there, including my son and his girlfriend and Ron Jackson, and he ended up being in our next band. So we would go around to different churches and sing and play. And we went to Second Baptist Church in South Hadley, and I met the preacher there, Don Bradley. It didn't hurt that he was also a banjo player, so we got to be friends. Well, in the Old Country Road band, like I mentioned, it was Ron Jackson. He was our lead singer. He played rhythm guitar, sang lead, very good loud voice. I didn't even really need a microphone. But then we had a guitar player, played flat pick. He played all the melody and everything and would take some nice breaks. We had a dobro player at one time. He kind of got a little too old and stopped. His name was Peter McLean. And then to come in to replace him was our mandolin player, Mark LaValle from East Hampton, and I was on upright bass. 3 of us were from South Hadley, and Mark was from East Hampton. So we would play around the valley quite often, different venues. We would play Barstow's in Hadley, McCrae's Farm in South Hadley, Council on Aging's, some of their homes, we would go there. It was unusual to some extent because some of the people that were in the homes came out there and they appeared to be asleep sometimes until we started playing some of the songs that they knew. Then they started singing along. So that got to be quite a popular venue for us.
Wow, that's pretty good. So you mentioned the fact that your lead singer is 85?
Yeah, Ron Jackson's 85. I'm 82. That's why we emphasize old in the Old Country Road band.
Wow.
So, but who knows how much longer we're going to be going. We all have some of our own issues at this age. The young'uns are a little better shape, but...
But you're still married, right? You're still married, yeah?
Yes. Well, I'm still married to Rose. I'll go back a little bit after dating several women and not making any headway. I was at a bluegrass festival in Connecticut, and I was promoting my Country Corner Coffee House, and I had my trailer there with an awning. She was there with a male friend. I think it was in July, and it was really hot, and there was no place for her to sit, so she came over under my canopy, and we started talking, and I think I really liked her, and I thought maybe she was going with this fella, and I said, well, do you have any sisters? She said, yeah, why, do you know them? And I said, no. My usual MO, when I meet a woman, I give her my card with my phone number on it. So we started talking back and forth, and then there was a concert at Buttery Brook, and we went to see that. Unknowingly, most of my family on Jane's side was there, so I had a time introducing everybody, and she got to know them. And now we're all good friends. and she's even a good friend with one of my nieces. Rose just had bariatric surgery along with my niece, Kim, and they're going through the whole thing together so they can
Wow.
relate to that. She's my guardian, if you will. Several years ago, I was diagnosed with dementia, and it's a slow-growing one. I'm taking some meds for it. But then she went to a class as a caregiver. Then we were asked to join what they were calling at the Council on Aging, Age and Dementia Friendly Group. And there was probably 5 or 6 of us. One was a leader. Another woman, her husband had it and had passed away, so she would talk about it. Sometimes we would have a gathering at the Council on Aging, and we would make our presentation. Rose would talk about being a caregiver, and I would, excuse me, I would talk about my journey with dementia. And as a joke, I would pull out my wallet and I would say, "My name is Dave Helman, but I know I have a mild one, but some people don't." But then I would go and tell my story about being in a band, having a radio show, and the music is going to keep me going.
Well, you're doing pretty dang good.
I can't remember anybody's name, but
That's okay. That works.
yep.
Well, thank you, Dave. This is awesome. I think we'll have a very good video.
We're done?
Yeah, I think we're done.
Oh boy.
We can sign.
Can't wait.
$2 bill, $2 bill.